This week, I welcome back author Katherine Brodsky to talk about her new book, No Apologies: How to Find and Free Your Voice in the Age of Outrage. I am always talking to people who have been canceled and people who survived it versus people who didn't survive this. Is there a difference in the way they handled it?
The people who did seem to do better with this are the people who faced it very directly and were able to not hide from it. So a lot of people who I think sort of faded into the background were people who were so overwhelmed by the experience that they ended up essentially disappearing.
Right.
And they either apologized, which is why, the book is called No Apologies. It's not because they don't believe in apologizing when you've legitimately done something wrong. I absolutely do. Listen, I'm Canadian. We apologize when people step on our feet.
Yeah.
So, but I think when you haven't done anything wrong or were that kind of outrage from the mob, then yes, I don't think people should apologize.
This is Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you are welcome. You know the drill. Please subscribe, rate, comment, share, reach out, tell your friends, send smoke signals, whatever. We love your feedback and we want to hear from you. If you like our work and want to support us, the best way to do that is join Phetasy.com. You'll get access to behind-the-scenes content, outtakes, discounts on merch, and the ability to submit questions for some of our upcoming guests. Support your favorite scrappy little internet heroes at Phetasy.com. Walk-Ins Welcome is brought to you by Patriot Gold. Call 888-614-9238 for a free investor guide today. All right, I'm with Katherine Brodsky, everybody. Welcome back to Walk-Ins Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's good to have you back. How have you been?
I've been okay. Somehow I was expecting the audience to respond. I don't know. It's probably one of those days.
Someday there will be a live audience clapping when I say that.
When I read the comments from the audience, sometimes, which I shouldn't do, I definitely shouldn't do it. But I was envisioning, what if all these comments were live and people were using their voices? That seems like such a nightmare.
I think people would be less inclined to say those things live, though.
That's probably true.
I think
a lot of it is people dehumanizing you to the point they can say anything.
Yeah, there's definitely a drive-by element of the internet that even I become a victim of, where you'll just scream, run by someone, see something, comment, and keep scrolling or moving, and it's always those comments that end up getting me in trouble. But that it's because it's that kind of element of whatever. It's just like a throwaway comment on something you see, forgetting that there's a person on the other side or other people viewing.
Oh, for sure. And I think I have a feeling maybe somebody has already made this, but it would make for a good short film where a person just walks on the street, a parody of the woman walking on the street and getting all these cat calls. You do that, but you do that with just a person walking randomly, and then people's comments, they just say it out loud to the person, what they would have said online. I think that'd be quite funny.
Just a lot of people yelling, "You should kill yourself."
Yes. You'd think it's such a stereotype of an online comment, but once you start getting those, you realize that, it actually happens.
I think Chappelle did something like If the Internet Was Real Life way early in Chappelle's show. He did a sketch, and it was more like the different sites, I think, and the different places you go online as opposed to what you are hearing. But I know he did something. I remember him doing something like that was hilarious. Always ahead of his time. Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
he tends to be.
Tell me about your book. Congratulations.
Thank you. Well, I have to say, once I physically got a copy of it, it was pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Look at me all prepared. Oh, and I have one in the background. I'm being like a proper author now with showing off. And Yeah, so the book is called No Apologies: How to Find and Free Your Voice in the Age of Outrage. And it's a book that took me a way too long time to write, but seems like things haven't changed that much. They've changed a little bit, but not that much. And the book is really about the importance of using your voice and what happens to society when one's voice is suppressed, which is, and I have different lessons on this based on the stories of different people that I've interviewed. I think 14 or 15 people I've interviewed for the book, and their stories of, silencing or cancellations, if you will, and in all sorts of fields, academia, in science, in arts, in tech. So, and I look at it also through, okay, what effect does that have on society too when that happens? Because it's a profound effect to not be able to have people exchange ideas freely. And so that's something that I really want to tackle in the book, and sort of give people an idea what the scale of the problem is, what the problem is, people who've gone through these experiences, and some have come out, some have not actually come out the other way. And usually you hear about the people who survived, so
Right.
even in this book, I would say it's much more of a reflective of people who made it through, because otherwise, how would I hear about them, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that I wanted to capture, though. And I have all sorts of stories. I even have, people who were affected in the knitting community, people who were in the a young adult book side of things, and science, and I have artists, and so it's just a really diverse range of people, and their experiences are all quite different as well,
Yeah.
with some common threads as well.
What inspired you to take on this project?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I guess that has to bring me back to my now a few years ago, my own experience with the mob. The phenomenon of cancel culture, that is something that I was noticing before this happened to me. And it was something I started speaking out before that happened to me. But I was still in the early stages of sort of unleashing my own voice. And what had happened is that I had a group that it was an offshoot of another group, a bigger group that was for women. And I thought, oh, I could do an offshoot of this group that's just going to be, because the group was for women journalists and writers. So I thought, oh, I can do a job group, just a job board for the same sort of group. So I started this group, and it had about 30,000 members. So it really grew because I guess people really like jobs, and we had mentorship program in there. We had, some advice and things like that, as well as just listing jobs. And one day a woman posted a job opportunity at ... Fox News.
Yeah.
And apparently that was just, that was completely sacrilegious. It was an evil thing to do. And she got this whole pylon on her where people just started calling her all sorts of things and bullying her and harassing her. So at the time I made a post saying, hey, let's keep away from politics in the group and from personal attacks, and let's just focus on helping each other. And, I thought it was a very peaceful post, very neutral post, but people didn't agree with that at all. And so they started calling me a white supremacist. I just as soon allow the KKK to hire from my job board. And it just got really, really insane and out of hand. And I never expected it. And in the beginning, I really engaged with people. And one thing they were telling me is, well, you can't make this group apolitical because it is inherently political because it's a group for women. And
Okay.
I mean, the reason it was a group for women was because it was just an offshoot of this other group. I didn't. Anyway, so I said, well, okay, I'll open it up to men then.
Right.
And I'll let you have your own, if you want to have the name, you can have it. I'll give you a month if you want to leave. But that really, really riled up the mob, and they started sending me just a lot of harassing messages, and messages with tiki torches, with crowds and mobs saying, your career is over. We have long memories. a bunch of threats, doxing attempts, and also they were reaching out to editors to have me, make sure that I would not work again. But I think that what was interesting, because I could have just, I think I could have just walked away from that at that point. And I think the mob doesn't have a huge attention span.
Yeah.
It was, probably would last a couple of weeks and they'll move on to someone else. But in all of this, I was also getting messages from other people. So two categories of people who said, look, I see what's happening to you and it's not fair, but I feel so ashamed because I'm too scared to speak up. So that was group number one. And group number two, those were people who essentially had their own experiences and often successfully canceled, had their careers destroyed, their communities, lost friends, all sorts of things, consequences that they've experienced. And so I felt like I had a certain responsibility to talk about it. And so I wrote a piece for Newsweek, and I was quite scared at the time because I thought, that's it, things will be over for me because I'm putting now a magnifying glass on this. But essentially, that's not what happened. It sort of called out the bullies, and it was my way, I guess, of standing up to them. And really that piece in some ways has inspired the book, because really it's about what happens when you allow radical, loud bullies to take over discourse and what that does to the rest of society. And that was the point of my piece ultimately, even though I used my experience as a springboard. So from that, I think it's interesting because now I've had a lot of time to reflect, and it's been a few years, and it's not as fresh, it's not as emotional. But at the time, it was incredibly emotional. I was just, and it was only later that I realized that, and I hate to use that word because I'm self-diagnosing, but it felt traumatic.
Yeah.
And I felt like, but my way of dealing with it was, okay, I want to fix the world. I kept initiating all these projects and media literacy projects, and then a project I wanted to do something with responsible journalism. And so I constantly had all these things that I just wanted to do because I guess I felt out of control, and I wanted to regain control over the chaos that our world was becoming. And so I started all these projects, and then I realized later on, like, I can't possibly do all of that, or at least not all at once. And now I've done the book, and I do want to do some of these projects, but we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. If for people who didn't listen to your first appearance on here, you go into much greater detail about that original cancellation that you experienced and how upsetting and, to use your word, traumatic it was. And I've had many people on this podcast. It's actually been mentioned in a New York Times article. It's kind of the podcast for misfit toys. And I am always talking to people who have been canceled. And the people that didn't survive it are always the ones that haunt me. They're always the most upsetting podcasts that I do. They're always the ones that are the most unsettling. They're the ones that keep me up at night. They're they're haunting in a way, because and it's something that you point out when you talk about how surprised you were when this happened. This is a common feature of, and I'm sure you saw this interviewing people in your book, these small kind of innocuous, like, hey guys, let's all get along, this is just like a job site, turn into these massive pile-ons, and it becomes larger than life and very quickly. And it is something that catches people completely off guard. And they don't have any kind of immunity or defense to it. I think maybe now there's more. And even I see the younger kids kind of preemptively defend themselves against this. But what do you think is a common thread from people who survived it versus people who didn't survive this? Is there a difference in the way they handled it? Is there any one reason, or is it completely individual, circumstance by circumstance?
It's a mix because I was very sad to discover that even one of the people that I featured in the book that I did think survived did not ultimately survive. Her business went out of business. And so that was quite sad to see. So I think there are circumstances where no matter what you do, you're not going to survive because there are consequences. But what I did notice as a common thread is that the people who did seem to do better with this are the people who faced it very directly and were able to not hide from it. So a lot of people who I think sort of faded into the background were people who were so overwhelmed by the experience that they ended up essentially disappearing.
Right.
And they either apologized, which is why, the book is called No Apologies. It's not because they don't believe in apologizing when you've legitimately done something wrong. I absolutely do. Listen, I'm Canadian. We apologize when people step on our feet.
Yeah.
So, but I think when you haven't done anything wrong or worth that kind of outrage from the mob, then yes, I don't think people should apologize because that apology is seen as, blood by this mob, this very angry, hungry mob of, bullies. They're just taking something that belonged in the classroom a long time ago and they're just doing it on a public stage. But the people that I've noticed, they were like the strongest in terms of going firmly against it.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the closest that I would find in a trend. They were also, they weren't, when they did it, when they stood up for things, it wasn't because they were brave. It was because they just felt a sense of right and wrong. So that's what was sort of the motivating factor for them. I don't think they thought it through. And like you say, people are generally not prepared for this.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I think it's one piece of advice in the book that somebody gives is, have a plan B. And that's if you decide to consciously use your voice, right? If you decide that, hey, I want to be free and authentic and I want to talk about what I want to talk about, well, then you have an opportunity to sort of prepare yourself, maybe have your own business, have an income source that's a little bit different. So you're not so dependent on the outside world and have a support network. But then a lot of times people really don't choose it. They, it's interesting because when I tell people the story that I had, I see as I'm telling it, they know the next step. They know exactly what's going to happen in terms of the mob getting really angry. I did not see that happening at all. I really thought I made a post that was fairly innocent and neutral. So that was very surprising to me at the time. And I think, a common thread for the most part, I think, is that they're not expecting this to happen. But it will happen more and more, whether you choose to use your speech as you wish, or if you just happen to accidentally say something that's wrong think or wrong speak to a certain group of people. So, yeah.
For the people that you interviewed for this book, of all of them, did the cancellations come from one side of the aisle or another more often?
Yeah. So, especially when I began this journey and writing this book, I was seeing the cancellations predominantly come from the left. And so I don't think that's much of a surprise. And I think a large part of that is because the left has more control, more power. It controls institutions, it controls culture. And so therefore, I think that was a big part of it. As I started kind of spending more time with people on the other side of the aisle, I think I saw a lot of people who initially were pretty committed to freedom of speech really turn. Not everyone. There's certainly a lot of people who maintain their principles, but I've also seen people call for cancellations. And I remember I did an interview with Greg. I'm going to mess up his last name, but he's the president. Yeah, Look Enough. Mm-hmm. He's the president of FIRE. And, he said to me that even in academia, what's interesting is that the requests for cancellations of professors is it's almost on par on the right and the left. It's just that the left, again, has, I think, more power. So more frequently, those cancellations happen on the left today. But I've really realized how quickly that could change. And people get very mad at me when I talk about it. I think it's the one thing that's really caused a lot of people to turn on me or attack me or vilify me. But I am just saying what I'm seeing, and I've really seen a lot of more calls. And it's not just, yes, some of it is calling for boycotts of companies, but also individuals who might hire or companies that might hire certain individuals, and therefore I see that as a boycott of an individual. But I've also seen just purely pursuing individual boycotts, or sorry, not boycotts, but cancellations, sometimes effective, sometimes not. And it's really, look, it's that temptation is within everybody. There's definitely people that I've seen where I'm like, that person says the worst, vile things, does not deserve, a platform. I really hate this person. And you want to take any power you have and apply it against them. And you really have to self-reflect and think, okay, what am I doing here? Because as they say, free speech is not just for the speech you like. That said, I think with free speech, people have a responsibility as well. So yes, you can say the N-word and be protected, for example, right? You're not going to go to jail, but you kind of have to reflect why, that free speech is really meant to put forward like controversial ideas or wrong thing and be able to discuss things freely, as opposed to let's just spew really hateful comments, at least things that I might find hateful, right? Mm-hmm. One of the reasons there's hate speech laws in some countries, but not in others, like in the US, there isn't, you can still engage in hate speech because who defines hate speech? So right. I absolutely get that and I stand by that, but it doesn't mean that I personally can't think that certain things that people say are absolutely vile. And I also have freedom of association. I don't have to associate with them, but I also don't want to be somebody who riles up mobs to go against people.
Yeah. It's funny how flat-footed everybody was caught by the cancel culture in general. I mean, I remember Justine Sacco vividly because I just happened to be online and was witnessing this in real time occurring. This kind of mob gets stirred up and it was like, has Justine landed yet? And she was really like one of the first mob victims of this innocuous tweet that goes insanely viral. And then when she lands, her life is kind of destroyed. And now she's working again. And people will argue that she wasn't actually canceled. And my question to the people, and I would like to know your thoughts on this, because a lot of people will say that cancel culture isn't real. And they'll use examples like people who survive it. But she was, well, first of all, what is their end goal? If your end goal, if you're saying cancel culture isn't real because that person is making a living, you ultimately want them to die. If you can't make money to go out there and make money and earn a living, how are you supposed to feed yourself, put a roof over your head? I mean, what is the expectation if somebody is out there, working still?
I guess that's the natural conclusion, isn't it? I haven't thought it out. Yeah.
What is your expectation people never get asked that question when they say, oh, well, cancel culture isn't real because this person is working. Okay, well, what is the instance in which cancel culture is real to you? These people don't exist. They don't work. Where did these people end up that cancel culture is quote unquote real? And I'm not sure. It seems very strange too, because it's a lot of times people who will be like, rightfully, when you get out of prison, you served your time, you should be able to go get a job and work, and it shouldn't be like this thing you did when you were a kid and then you went to jail for, or even as an adult, define you for the rest of your life. But the same people will kind of expect you to burn at the stake forever with no timeline on how long you're supposed to suffer the punishment for your alleged crime, which you didn't even, sit in front of a jury. It was jury by mob for. So These
Right.
are interesting things that the cancel culture isn't real, people, because they'll say it's accountability culture. When it's convenient, when it gets turned around on them, suddenly it's cancel culture is real. So,
Well, and it's been turning. It's kind of funny because I've been observing it has been turning on them, especially in certain contexts. And then they say, "Well, where's our free speech? And what is this cancel culture?" So with a lot of
context.
activists, yeah, it's really funny. Like,
Context. Oh, now
yes,
we
it's
need
context.
context. Now
Now
context
we need
matters.
context. That's right. Depends on context. So this has been sort of fantastical to watch, but makes me think, oh, can we somehow, now that they're experiencing it, can we somehow bring them on board? But of course, I don't think they're going to stick by those principles when it comes to any groups that they don't like. So it's just that it's being weaponized against them. So it's quite frustrating to see, because to me, if you support, and this has been my frustration too with the right, where openly very many people have said that, oh, well, you know what? The tactics of the left are working. They're effective. They're an effective weapon. We should use them. We're starting to use them. Oh, they're upset. They're upset because it's being used against them. Well, too bad. Tough. They're going to get a taste of their medicine. And then when we get our power back, which is now the most fundamentally important thing to do, because, the country is being destroyed by these evil leftists. Well, once we have that power back, then we'll recommit to our principles of free speech. So, to me, and again, people get very mad when I point that out, but the fact that it's true. And in terms of cancel culture, existing or not existing, and accountability, like you said, it's trial by mob, it's the court of public opinion. There is a reason why we have a court system. And it's an important, and even there's a lot of gray areas. But, here we have a mob that's trying, a mob of the loudest voices. It's not even some kind of an evil trial. And yes, there is accountability and consequences and all of that stuff for the things that you say. But the problem is that we are trying everyone at the same level. So you can have somebody have an old tweet that's, says something slightly inappropriate, and that person has long changed, or it wasn't even that big of a deal. But they're getting punished with this ferocity of, yes, let's destroy their lives. And, it's true, is, who's to say what is offensive and what is not. But ultimately, we do have some levels of agreement in society. But the problem is that has shifted so far out that people get punished again for the smallest transgression, sometimes not for a transgression at all. And then on top of it, they don't have a way of sort of coming back. So if you apologize, that doesn't really help you. It makes things worse generally. And if you've changed, there isn't really so what, right? Nobody cares about that. It's this bloodlust that people have. So I'm not an absolutist when it comes to, you can say any horrible thing you want to say, or do any horrible thing you want to do, treat people poorly, and there's zero consequences in the world. One of the consequences that I'm not going to associate with that person, probably. Sometimes I do, by the way, because I try to have conversations with people in the hopes that maybe that we can find some common ground, but I'm not obligated to, and nobody's obligated to. And I think that's the difference. I have one person who I really admire in the book, Daryl Davis. You're probably familiar with him, right? So for your audience who may not be, he's, Black, jazz musician, civil rights activist. And he has become quite known for getting KKK members to basically leave the KKK, but he just does it through having conversations with them. So I'm a big believer in that, and just seeing how well that has worked. And I don't even think that when he has the conversations, his intent is like to change their minds, but more so to give them a wider perspective and for them to get to know the person that they supposedly hate. And so I think there's a lot of value in that. But, you can get canceled just for associating with the wrong people, and that's that guilt by association is a problem too, because it just causes people to get more and more radicalized. Because if you don't have people having conversations with each other, especially when they're on different spectrums, then they just get their beliefs just get reinforced further and further. And I think that's why we have had more shifts on the left, I think further left, and then on the right, I think it has been going further right, at least as far as I'm seeing it.
Gold has soared past $2,000 an ounce, guys. Wars in Israel and Ukraine and rate cuts on the table are fueling gold's meteoric rise. There's a direct correlation to the national debt and price of gold. In 2020, the U.S. debt was $23 trillion and gold was $1,500 an ounce. In 2023, the debt is $33 trillion, numbers you cannot even get your mind around, and gold is over $2,000 an ounce. Donald Trump warned the U.S. dollar no longer being the world standard will be our greatest defeat in 200 years. Call the proud Americans of the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Mention Bridget Phetasy, and you'll always get best-in-class service from Patriots protecting Patriots. Patriot Gold Group has a no-fee-for-life IRA where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver, and you may be eligible for the no-fee-for-life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Call 888-614-9238 for a free investor guide today. Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs top-rated gold IRA dealer 7 years in a row. Call 888-614-9238. Mention Bridget Phetasy. Who on the left will you get canceled for associating with?
That's a good point. I won't get, it also depends on what your tribe is. So if I was a right winger, if I was a conservative Republican, whatnot, I would, and I became friends with AOC, I probably wouldn't be very welcome in some groups. And there's also such a diversity of individuals. I know that I have had, because I'm perceived as being more left-leaning, some people have welcomed me completely, have been wonderful on the right, and other people have called me all sorts of names. So I don't want to say that it doesn't happen. I don't think it happens to the same extent, but also because I'm not associated, I'm not part of the group fully. But I don't think it is exercised to the same extent as is currently exercised on the left. I think there has been sort of, for years, the right was associated with things like racism and bigotry. And that was sort of, it's almost like you were inherently accepting that that's the case. Mm-hmm. And I would say, even though I've been always fairly open-minded about talking to people and not vilifying different spectrums, I would still say that snuck into my head to some extent.
Yeah.
And I had... once I started spending more time talking to conservatives, I realized, well, that's not really true. That said, it's a spectrum, mm-hmm. and there's definitely a movement within that group that is, I find quite dangerous and does adhere to all of these stereotypes. But certainly many people are not, what we've been told that they are.
Yeah, I would say, from what I've observed over the past several years of just being an observer of this, and I think like you, I'm probably more center right than you are at this point, but only because I do see the right check their extremes. So I think the right wing much more often calls out that fringe element that is openly racist and openly white supremacist or anti-Semitic than I see on the left, where it seems to, like you said, be allowed to capture every institution to a point that now those chickens are coming home to roost, and you're seeing people who are a little bit more like yourself. And I'm curious to see what will happen in the next couple years, because I think a lot of people who felt this way during the Trump administration didn't feel emboldened to say anything, or they were afraid to, because their center left people would have said, but the right, which is kind of the refrain. The like, oh, but the right. The left is bad, but the right. And I do have a friend who's kind of pointed out that is like the only ideology that exists in America. And now I kind of can't unsee that. So I'm interested to see how this rubber band kind of snaps back in light of another Trump administration and run for president, because immediately all of these people kind of pivoted out of their cozy institutions that they were with and started their own brands of like, slightly reactionary left wing. And I'm curious to see what happens in this, because they, a lot of them, I think, have created enough escape velocity in the past few years that they'll survive anyway. But they're not going to be welcomed back into the fold of like mainstream left,
Yeah, and I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. I will agree with you that on the right, there is more. What I would say it's more dissent. So dissent is generally an accepted trend. My gosh, my words have escaped me. I think I'll catch up one day. But it's something that it's a characteristic that they seem to have, where I see a lot of more dissent amongst the different, I would say there's like so many different groups on the right, and even looking at their political sort of who they support and the infighting that goes on, as chaotic and crazy as it seems sometimes, there is also a healthy element to that, because they're not afraid to dissent amongst each other. And what I've noticed on the left, and maybe I am missing some context because I haven't had an opportunity to have as good of a glimpse at the sort of the political discourse on the left, but my impression has been that there's just a lot less opportunity to disagree with each other. And it's like you have to all be adhering to the same ideas. You have to sort of adhere and support the same candidate. And you're kind of a pariah if you don't, because now you're weakening your party. And so that the Republicans can get in the US. So I find that a very unhealthy thing. And I've even noticed one thing I really upset me about, and I mean, I'm in Canada, so, but we're all so deeply affected by American politics that we pay so much attention. But both in Canada and the US, this sort of happens where,
Canada's lost.
We'll get it back. I'm gonna run, maybe. We'll see.
Canada seems so lost. Every time I see stuff coming out of Canada, I'm like, holy shit, they don't have any.
We're less crazy though, like in some ways. Like we have a more.
It seems more like there's more totalitarian control over the citizens.
In some ways, and I think it's also the politeness of the Canadians that. But what I noticed is, okay, so when Trump won, the people who voted for him were just vilified as these, despicable individuals, all rednecks, racist, dumb, all these things, right? Deplorables. And, listen, some of them are, but there's all sorts of people who voted for him, and the reasons that they voted for him are very diverse and quite important, actually. And part of it was this, because a lot of the people who voted for Trump were actually former Democrats, and some of them were Bernie bros even, right? So what they were unhappy with was the system and sort of the working class being forgotten and those kinds of things. And what the Democrats should have done is said, okay, we should listen to the people, and our party has been, off. And there's some things that we're not addressing that are important to people. And let's kind of let's tweak some things. Let's make ourselves a better party. And that's what I would have liked to see done. Same with, in Canada with the Liberal Party. I did like the Liberal Party in the past, but I don't like it under its current leadership. And it's not listening to people.
Yeah, some would argue that Biden was an example of listening. Like he was the quote unquote, whether he's proven to be that, whatever. But he was the moderate, kind of old school.
There was no acknowledgement.
Of course not.
And I think that's part of it. Politicians are always scared to acknowledge any wrongdoing. And I think what people really want is actually more transparency, more acknowledgement of wrongdoings. And you're going to have this bitterness to the very end with a lot of the policies that were, including, let's say, COVID, where people are not, I think people are generally willing to forgive, but they can't forgive something that hasn't been acknowledged. So as much as my book, I call it No Apologies, like I say, I really do believe in being accountable when you have messed something up, when you have made a mistake, and you should acknowledge it. So change is acknowledging, but a lot of things, I think people would criticize Biden and say that he hasn't addressed. I think he has done some good things for sure, but I don't think because I've asked Republicans, can you name one good thing about Biden or the Democratic Party? And they're like, I couldn't possibly name one. And it's this, when I asked, it's just,
I think that goes both ways, though.
Yeah, it does go both ways.
And it's
although
weird
I had better luck with.
It's weird because you found a leftist who could say a good thing about Trump.
Very rare, but sometimes I have. Yes.
I don't believe.
But but it's also leftist that follows me, right?
Right.
Which already makes them inherently a little bit more open-minded. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because on the one hand, you're saying that people should be more transparent and people want that, and politicians should be more willing to admit when they're wrong. And on the other hand, you say we all kind of have this mob-like bloodlust in us that wants to pile on people. And I'm kind of two minds because when I'm in my higher self of like, oh, Bridget just got done with yoga and she's feeling like we are all one, I agree. I think that it's good to maintain a principle, try and stand, holding your principles shouldn't matter if it's popular or not popular, if it's powerful or not powerful. There's been this really interesting, very large debate about kind of the evangelicals giving over the kind of power of God to the power of Trump instead, in lieu of God. And it's fascinating when you really
see that video that Trump made?
No.
God made Trump. That was the video. You should watch it. It's quite it's something.
I mean, people truly believe that. And then I don't know how one on the right would, or even whatever the angsty working class who might not feel represented by this like liberal more elite facet that's taken over the left wing, kind of the global, village people, as opposed to there's populism rising on both sides. But I don't know how you would fight if this is how would you fight against this mechanism that has taken over all the institutions, only cares about power, does not care about being hypocritical, does not care if one day they're weaponizing something that 2 days ago they said was a crime or it's a hate speech, doesn't care if one day they're calling it cancel culture and the next day they need context. How would you even fight against that if not by adopting their own playbook? Because you're certainly not going to win by adhering to principles. And this is exactly why we saw Trump win, because people felt like he was standing up to this. They felt like they were underdogs, not completely incorrectly in the culture.
You can stand up to things, though, I think, without losing your principles. I think you don't have to stand up in that way. And just to clarify, I think one reason that I think that that transparency is necessary when I require that of politicians because they're elected public officials. And that's, I think, a very different thing from just an individual. And that's why they should be very much accountable to the public that elected them or didn't elect them, but they still represent. I think people forget that. It doesn't really matter if somebody voted for you. You're still representing that person. And therefore, that's your boss. And we have this position, the system where it feels like the boss is the politician or is the political leader. And that's just not right anyways to me, not the way it should be. But in terms of
because they're not
power,
actually, they generally, our politicians don't really care about the people's interests. Maybe on a local level, they're forced to, but on the national levels, it doesn't seem that way. Their interests
power,
seem,
and they think that what they do is also best. And to some extent, you have to believe that if you're going to run for public office, because there is a level of arrogance in it. But also, why would you even run for office if you didn't think that you knew best how to fix things or how to make things better? But I would like to see people who, see it as a service, as a sacrifice, and aren't so interested in the power, but more so in maybe curating an environment where solutions can be implemented better and surrounding themselves and being really good at picking the right individuals to lead different sectors and create policies. But unfortunately, that's not where we're at. But that's what I'd like to see. And I guess it's in the similar vein, you say, how do we get things back to working order if we don't use power and those same tactics, because they are effective. And there is truth to that. I'm not going to deny it. I can be a little bit naive, I think, sometimes. And I do value principles over winning. So that is, maybe it's a character flaw, maybe not, but it is part of how I see the world. I do think, though, there are other ways to regain power. They'll take longer. They're just going to be less violent. And I think about it in terms of one thing I don't like is even how the systems are organized, the election system in general. But the only way to overthrow that system is anarchy, ultimately. And I don't want people to be hurt. So will it be effective? Yes. Revolutions can be very effective in general, right? Revolutions have caused a lot of change in very short periods of time. But revolutions have also claimed many, many lives. So to me, I guess I value those lives above and the principle above the rapid change. That said, I do think there are things that we can do to change the systems, and some of them I haven't thought of, but some of them, even just people using their voices and pushing back. And you see parents going to teacher meetings, for example, in their schools and speaking up. I mean, these things have an impact. People building new organizations, people supporting people who are doing new things that they like, whether it's a podcast or a new university or anything like that. There is a lot of impact that can come from that if it's done in large enough numbers. The problem to me is that the numbers are just currently not large enough because people are so scared, sometimes indifferent, but also scared. And I think if people take a much more proactive role, I think that change can indeed happen without, a bloody revolution.
Yeah.
And it's scary to me because I actually do hear people talking about, even the idea of civil war. I don't know how reflective it is of society overall, but that is even a conversation that is supported by thousands is kind of terrifying to me. And I don't want to see that happen. That said, you can't have people are feeling victimized and oppressed by one side, and so they lash out. And I understand it. I just don't think it's going to lead anywhere that's good.
Yeah, the Civil War conversation again, it seems very online to me. I don't hear people in real life talking about that. You know, I also.
But those people exist in real life.
Of course, but they're not the majority. Like they're.
No, and I doubt that it's the majority.
And I'm not saying that it can. I just don't know what that looks like in practice. Because in America, for instance, it wouldn't be red states versus blue states because we have blue cities and red states, and it's not like it's very divided by cities and rural. It's very divided by even when you drill down into the demographics of each kind of district. There's a lot of purple places still in America. I don't really know and I think more and more purple every day that goes on into Biden versus Trump season 2. I'm not sure. I just always ask people who are like, there's going to be a civil war. Like, you know, the closest thing that maybe bumps up against a civil war like scenario is actually unfolding in Texas, where you have the Texas government saying we're putting up barbed wire against the orders of the federal government. Now that is a place where you say, okay, this is something where it's the people versus the United States government. I think we know who will win that fight if it comes down to it, but that kind of thing can escalate into what would be something that looks like a civil war. But again, I don't know. Most of the guys who are fighting in our army are from small town America. They're not like dudes from cities. You know, they're not going to turn on their own people. So you still have to rely on the military turning on American citizens. It's like if you actually play that tape for it, people throw that around, and I'm like, you're gonna go shoot your neighbor. I mean, it happens on like micro levels all the time in America because it's America, but is it gonna happen on this like national level really, where people are taking up arms against? And by the way, if you go out in the suburbs and talk to normies and people who pretty much spend all their day on Instagram and working their job, whatever that job is, they're fucking exhausted. They're trying to raise kids. They don't have time to like be out there fighting. I don't know. And what is the war over? Like what are we fighting over?
I think you make a compelling argument, and I think you're probably right. Though I would also caution that most revolutions have been started by very small groups and have remained because people were, again, too afraid to sort of push back against these things. So,
or too tired.
Or too tired.
No,
so,
I
mean,
think there's a point.
Your practical level, you're right, but yeah.
But I'm more like, okay, play the tape forward. The Antifa gangs, are they gonna spill out into the rural? Like, that's not happening. It's not happening.
Didn't they have a fight out in Seattle? They might not go to rural. Maybe they would. I mean, but they did have a standoff in Seattle or Portland. I can't remember which city.
I am telling you, as a woman who has lived and driven all over America, there is no chance that the urban revolutionaries would last 2 minutes if they entered into rural territory in some kind of actual battle. That's just not a real thing. It is fantasy to think that is something that is even like a real fight that is going to exist in this country. I could be completely wrong, but
I hope you're right, and I think you make a good case for being right. So I think you're probably right, but I still am quite. It is still quite shocking to hear as many people speak in these terms, and
there
that
are
means
people
it
who
just
are
means
sitting in studios. Though their bread and butter is sowing dissent and this kind of like, it's so easy to say that from an air conditioned studio. Be like, civil war is coming. Like, this sounds like something a drug addict says, you know, like,
I don't think it's something somebody very normally, like very sane says.
There's a lot of unrest, of course, but I am an optimist about this country. I think we have survived much worse. We literally survived an actual civil war which if anyone reads a frickin' history book was bloody and horrific. And in the 1800s, before we had antibiotics, before we all had televisions, before we all had drive-through pharmacies, like this was at a time when it was so hard to live anyway, and people were taking up arms against their brothers and their relatives. And we managed to somehow see our way through that. We made it through the 60s. I mean, my aunt always reminds me of this. She's like, we had a sitting president assassinated, and then we had his brother assassinated, and then Martin Luther King Jr., and still America, and there was unrest in every city like you're seeing now, and we managed to make it through that.
I have to say, you guys are very wild with all these assassinations. I mean, I don't think there's been any Canadian prime ministers assassinated.
America is nuts. Anyway, I mean, the post-Civil War history of expansion in this country is bloody and insane, and building the railways and the gold rush and the entire West Coast. I mean, the history of this country is absolutely nuts, and it was built by rugged ass people who were hard and used to death and now we're kind of soft, and people are trying to convince me that we're going to get into like some civil war. I'm like, this is the softest generation America has ever seen. I don't know.
Bridget, I'm with you now.
I think I don't think you need to worry.
No civil war. I
think maybe if things get harder, then you'll need to worry.
Okay, if I see anybody talking about civil war again, I'm going to send them a clip of you, and and all their fantasies and delusions will immediately come to an end.
Look, I get it. I get that it's like a thing we like to toss around because it's an easy thing to say. It's like calling anybody that you know that you don't disagree with a Nazi. It's like, you do know what the actual Nazis did and were like.
I've been called a Nazi now by both sides of the aisle. It's really
people
something.
on the right call you a Nazi?
Yeah.
For
I got
what?
called a Nazi by people on the right.
They usually call me a commie.
And this predates, Israel-Palestine conflict. So that, they always like to use Nazi both on the left and the right in relation to that. But I got called a Nazi because I disagreed with Project Veritas using hidden cameras to record people, while pretending to be their friend, essentially. And for that, I got called a Nazi.
Weird.
Yeah, it is weird, actually. I think it's weird to call anybody a Nazi when they're not actually part of the Nazi ideology. But
I feel like Nazis are pretty open about being Nazis too. That's what always cracks me up. Yeah, most Nazis are not hiding it.
Yeah, like anytime somebody gets called a Nazi these days, they're like, "But I'm not racist. I love black people," or whatever, right? Which means that as soon as they utter that sentence, they're gonna get far more of a pile-on. It's like, all my best friends are.
Sometime in the early 80s, REO Speedwagon's airplane made an unannounced, middle-of-the-night landing.
This is my friend Kyle MacLachlan, the star of Twin Peaks. And he's telling me about how he discovered a real-life Twin Peaks in rural North Carolina, not far from where he filmed Blue Velvet.
What was on the plane was copious amounts of drugs coming in from South America. Supposedly, Pablo Escobar went looking for other spots, quiet, out-of-the-way places to bring in his cocaine.
My name is Joshua Davis, and I'm an investigative reporter. Kyle and I talk all the time about the strange things we come across, but nothing was quite as strange as what we found in Varnamtown, North Carolina.
There's crooked cops, brother against brother. Everyone's got a story to tell, but does the truth even exist? Welcome to Varnamtown.
Varnamtown is available wherever you listen to podcasts.
Did you self-publish?
No, it's a publisher in the U.S.
Oh, okay.
Called Peachstone. Yeah,
nice.
They did Cynical Theories also, and a whole bunch of other books.
Okay, cool. And do you feel like who's the general, audience for this book?
Well, when I wrote it, I did I wanted to reach people on the left because I felt like there was some real self-reflection to do, because I knew that they were. I know that a lot of people on the left share the same views as many people on the center right, and so, but they are so afraid of voicing these opinions, and I know because they tell me so, and I really wanted to write something that empowers them and allows them to have empathy and understand the situations that other people find themselves in, to understand the extent of the problem and how much we need that solution of them speaking. That said, it doesn't mean that that book is just for people, on the left who are the silenced, but I called it, the silenced majority. That's one of my subheadings, because I do believe there's a lot of people who are keeping their voice, including a lot of conservatives who are just as terrified, right? They're afraid of this phenomenon. A lot of the people who were actually canceled that I know are people on the left, because it's easier for their own tribe to cancel them.
Right.
I
mean,
the
I
book
think
was
never
really
Trumpers were kind of canceled. There's some argument to be made that if you were not all on board with Trump or still aren't, you I don't know if you get canceled, but you again, they just don't. I don't even know how to compare the two anymore, because they really just don't have the same power.
But what I meant is actually people who are conservatives were afraid of being canceled by the left as well. So I wasn't talking about the right canceling them necessarily.
Right.
They're afraid of using their speech. And so
everyone's afraid.
So everyone who is afraid, who has reasonable, a reasonable voice, who's not this radical, who sees there are some things in society that are happening that aren't right, and we should talk about it. We can discuss it, figure out what are the better solutions. How can we fix this? How can we understand this problem better, but are too afraid? I mean, there's a lot of subjects like that. The one that I was most afraid to ever touch was anything to do with the trans world, because people come at you very, very hot. And I still don't really discuss it outside of long form, just because of the nuance. And I want to be able to convey my thoughts accurately. But for example, that is something where you're ultimately looking out for people, unless you are someone who just hates trans people. You are just looking out for people, especially kids and women. And that was a subject that, or is a subject that's really, really difficult to discuss. And you need the people discussing it to be actually just sensible people with empathy, but also empathy for different groups of people, and be able to sort of figure out the best answers to protect people. Mm-hmm. That should be the goal. But the only people having discourse right now on that topic, for example, are like the activists or the people who really hate trans people, right? So you have two really radicalized groups, and you're seeing more voices emerge as well now, but it's much harder, and it really should be a much more mainstream discussion, in my opinion, as well as, I picked the most hot button topic, but there's so many.
Yeah, I actually don't. I disagree that it's only the people who hate trans people who are pushing back and the activists, because I think the radical feminists have been quite vocal in their fear for women and children in regards to this matter for decades. And a lot of the stuff you're seeing is coming from women. They just get labeled as hateful of trans people. Like, I don't think J.K. Rowling hates trans people. And she is someone who is constantly, like, even the other day, there was a tweet that was like, known transphobe J.K. Rowling will be, directing and involved in the television series based on her freaking books. And that seems to be a flattening of the discourse, because I actually think that it does try to escape to the mainstream, but people will label everyone who's against it as hateful of trans people.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they've developed a word for it, right? TERF. And certainly, I do think there's a lot of reasonable people who are trying to have this discourse. What I meant is, like, I'm seeing more of them now. I wasn't seeing as many before, but it's still, the attention gets often shifted to the people that are more radical on each side of this. It's same thing with people who are trans, who are just very reasonable individuals whose voices just don't get amplified in the same way that people who are sort of outrageous and want to have these authoritarian sort of impulses. But there's plenty of trans people who are not like that and are actually willing to be part of the discourse, but their voices don't get amplified. I would say by either side to some degree, but I think there is more openness about including them on the trans on the right side, but on the left, I think they really get shunned, even though it's their own experience that they're sharing, and they have some authority, I imagine, to speak on this. So, yeah, it's kind of, but it's a battlefield. I guess that was what I wanted to convey. There is this sense of this is a battlefield as opposed to civil discourse that we can just like, listen, let's talk about how we can find a middle ground of some sort where, we protect people's rights and we protect people from getting hurt, and that should be really the framing, I think, of this.
Do you think it's gotten somewhat better since, you've interviewed all these people, and do you feel like the tide has turned a bit? Elon taking over Twitter?
Yeah, I think the tide has turned to some extent where I think there's a lot more fatigue from this, and including, so in my conversations with people, and I hate that I'm framing this left and right because I've been self-reflecting on this a lot, and it bothers me because I didn't used to see the world in these terms at all. But it's a shorthand, I guess. But
and I mean, if it is like a battlefield, as you mentioned, who's fighting this battle? Is it just everyone fighting everyone, or
it's true? But it's become easier to have these conversations with people and have them sort of agree and. Because I've been pretty open about my views with people. And so I have these conversations openly, and I always have this little fear in my head. Oh my God, they're going to hate me. They're going to attack me. And I'm not very confrontational. And so I have a lot of social anxiety. So it's a little bit tricky, but I've found people to be fairly receptive and open to having conversations, and I haven't really been attacked, as certainly in person, and I've been able to have sort of these difficult conversations. But a lot of times it's not me just like convincing people of this, it's really them agreeing or bringing up their own issues. I was talking to someone at a party about my book, and this person was like, oh, I'm going to buy this book, but then more than that, he shared that his son had this experience, being canceled. Yes. Yeah. So it's how I think a lot of people are affected by it. They've either have a friend who this happened to, or some brush on their own of maybe saying something a little bit offbeat and people turning on them. Most of the time, smaller scale incidents, but incidents nonetheless, and it changes how they view things. And they are sort of, there is, like I said, there's a fatigue. They're tired of this. And a lot of the people I know are in film and in arts, and that is something that should inherently be unsafe in terms of you being able to, you shouldn't be playing it safe is what I mean. So you should be able to say and express yourself, I think, in ways that you'd like to as an artist. But if you're in environments where they stifle that, so for example, if you're in a TV writing room and you're trying to write funny jokes or inappropriate characters, and you have somebody who's going to tattletale and say, oh, this person, he said this very racist or sexist thing or whatnot, it cripples your creativity. And you have shows like, I forgot what's the name of that show, but there's a show I'm thinking of where all the characters are just so inappropriate, sometimes evil, objectively evil. But that's part of it. That's part of the expression. And they say things that people might not like to hear, but you need to be able to play with that and get things wrong sometimes and be like, oh, maybe that joke crossed the line a little bit, but okay, I'll tone it down. But be able to do that without somebody, assuming the worst of intentions. And I thought about that even in my friendships, because I've noticed how with my closest friends, I'm really free to say what I want and I never really have to worry. And the reason for that is that they always assume good intent.
I thought you were going to be like, and the reason for that is that they're all conservatives.
No, actually, they're not. I now have definitely some conservative friends, but my closest, like oldest friends are not conservatives at all. But I might have swayed them towards certain things, but they're very open-minded. That's one thing that they do have in common, and they're not quick to, they're willing to change their minds on things. And they're open, but they know me, I know them, and we know about each other that we are, people with good intent. So even if I said something that might sound a little bit offensive or a little bit wrong, the tendency there would be more so to be like, hey, what do you mean by this? What'd you say? And part of why I think our world has gotten so much more radicalized, and I do think social media has done incredible damage because we don't have as much. There's a lot of people who are very lonely, who don't have real life interactions and formed communities online. But those communities, and while there's good things about it, those communities are also somewhat superficial. You don't really get to know people in the same way. You don't have experiences with them. You don't rely on them, during the worst of times to be there while you cry or hold your beer. I don't know. It's just a different experience. It's a different kind of connection. And while I don't want to completely discount them, I do think that they are not as full and as authentic and as deep. And therefore, when somebody transgresses, it's much easier to go after them.
Yeah.
Because
or excommunicate
it's not
them.
as much of it's not as much of a real person to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that plays a big role in this.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it too is just the academic indoctrination of an entire generation. And I'm only seeing this just getting back on stage again, doing comedy for the show that I'm doing, that I have residency at, is a primarily left-leaning show. And some of the audiences, you can tell, are pretty chill and don't care. And then sometimes we have people walk out and we have a lot of tension in the room, and I feel bad for the left wing because they've like boxed themselves into this corner where everything needs to be offensive. And it's a crazy level of self-importance where you're just constantly walking. It's like everyone got a personality disorder or something, like or like it's like living with an alcoholic. You're just like, I feel like they all walk on eggshells.
I also blame the parents, to be honest. I know people like to blame the educational institutions, which of course take a lot of the blame. And but even when I
weren't teaching them about all this like crap, they
what
did
the
not
parents
learn
are
this
doing
from their
is
parents.
No, but here's what the parents are doing. And this is the North. I'm an Eastern European background. So I watch this from that lens, because what drives me crazy about Western parents is that they overindulge their children. Everything they do is absolutely wonderful. And they do not teach them how to be sort of critical and skeptical, because when you go to school and maybe my parents overdid it because they grew up in a culture where you really needed to be very critical and skeptical, because the indoctrination was even far, far more than it is here, because I'm come from the Soviet Union.
Right. Real communism.
Yeah, real communism. That's right. Well, the real, it wasn't real communism, because real communism has never been achieved. It hasn't been tried. That's right. But I think coming from that, what they instilled in me is this like level of really, I'm very skeptical. I look at things a little bit more from the outside. So I don't feel like I was ever particularly indoctrinated by the things my teacher said. I would kind of go, okay, I kind of agree with this. This is BS. I don't. I don't see that in a lot of kids in the West. I really don't. And I see that a lot in immigrant children. And I think because they grew up with the same levels of skepticism. And again, it can be a little bit too much sometimes, but I do think I had a healthy sort of defense mechanism against sort of the indoctrination aspect of it. I mean, I took communism classes in university, and I didn't become a communist. I took all sorts of my environment was, especially in a university, was incredibly left leaning, super left leaning. But I still thought completely for myself. I used to tease people, and I tell them I was a libertarian or a conservative just to get reactions. It was a bit different back then too, though, because you could do that and your life wouldn't be over. And I think now my university life would probably be over if I did the same, engaged in the same shenanigans, which is very sad. Yeah. But that's the thing. I think you
can... doesn't that kind of point you just made lend itself to the argument that I'm making, which is that it's the schools that are primarily doing this? Because even if you teach your kid to be skeptical and they're in this environment where their entire school will be over if they joke about being a conservative, then wouldn't you say that is more onus on the school?
Yeah, I'm not going to diminish that these institutions have absolutely become very, very unhealthy and problematic. But I do think that parents can give their kids a skill to, yes, they can't do much about how those people are going to respond to the comments being made. But what they can do is ensure that their child is thinking for themselves, regardless of what ideology they fall for.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that, because I know so many people who are conservative and right-leaning, and their kids are filling out college applications and they've got to write some DEI statement in order to get into the school, or they have to go through some training.
But that's them pretending, right? That's them pretending. It's not them necessarily having to have these views. I mean, that's how it worked in the Soviet Union to some extent. I don't think everybody, especially later on, was fully indoctrinated, but they did pretend. Even one of the students, one of the people in my book, because he went to a school, he was a student, and he went to a school and with classes that were very, very left leaning. And he would write these really bullshit papers intentionally, and he would try to push, the line further and further. And he found that kind of fun. Now, he shouldn't have to do that. Absolutely, that's a horrible environment, and I think that needs to be addressed. But that didn't mean that he couldn't think for himself. Is the point I'm trying to make?
My point is that the parents who have given their kids the same level of skepticism that you got they're in a different environment and have learned that they have to just pretend and suck it up, and they know how to play the game, and maybe they're the silent ones who haven't been indoctrinated. But in general, if you come from a left-leaning household and everything is just kind of accepted as whatever, and then you go to a left-leaning school and you go even further left because that's the path that you're on, I do think that it is harder for them to escape that trap that they've walked into than, for instance, somebody like yourself, or somebody even like one of these kids who's just pretending because they were given I think the people who were given a certain level of skepticism like you, they do exist, and they kind of survive, and they get through, and they know how to maneuver and pretend, like you said. I don't think it's great. Jordan Peterson has a lot of comments about how you shouldn't do that ever.
It's awful. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're just playing a game and giving it only makes the system stronger. But on the other hand, like in your book, you have which hills are you going to die on? Are you going to get kicked out of college because you wanted to fight against some stupid thing? Or are you just going to suck it up and go ski and have fun, or go wherever you're go party wherever you are and like get out
Yeah, and
with a
most
degree.
people are not willing to sacrifice their well-being for, and look, I can
idea.
understand that. But I like one person, Brett Weinstein, who's in the book, he does say something that really resonated with me or made me think about it more. Because so he said that, people would go to war and risk their lives for, for a country, for principles, whatever. But the stakes there are life and death. And the stakes here are not necessarily quite life and death. It is a career, maybe, embarrassment. Like, it's different stakes in different situations. And yet people are still so afraid. And so we allow that culture to be ruined. So people, in a way, yes, by adhering to what the university says that you should do, you are giving in power to the university, which is probably the point that Jordan Peterson was making. So you're basically supporting that system, and he's right. I just can't tell somebody that they have to sacrifice everything about their lives before they even began. I just can't say that to them. That's a choice they have to make for themselves if they do. And hey, I don't know if I would always make that same choice. At this point in my life, I was more willing to do it. Probably in other points of my life, I wasn't. I sure picked a heck of a time, though, but, it is what it is.
Do you think the book, how has the reception been so far in this? It's dropping right as, Trump is getting pretty much, it will be all but assured after tonight as we talk on the eve of the New Hampshire primaries.
Yeah, I think it's probably a sure thing. Well, the only people who've read it so far are people in the media realm. So the response has actually been really good from them. But I also, I'm really hoping to get, like I said, I wanted to be able to reach the silenced majority, and I didn't want to just be able to reach people on the right who are far more supportive of the book, and I knew they would be. People on the right just are definitely more interested in it. But I have gotten good response overall to the topic because that was the group I was most afraid of. I'm still afraid to this day to some extent. I was afraid to share it on some of my very left-leaning networks, and I even shared it in the original group, and that had led to my, cancellation attempt. And it was, the response has actually been really good. And it was almost surprising to me. And a lot of people are saying, oh, this is so timely. This is so needs to be talked about. So that has felt really, really encouraging to me. That said, it's much harder to get it, to talk about it on anything that's much more mainstream, more left-leaning media. There's a few entities that are in the works, but it is much tougher, and that is a huge problem. I mean, it's been a huge problem for me as a writer too. I used to write things that are just subjective pieces, features, interviews, things like that, and I've transitioned into becoming a bit more commentator, wanting to tackle more societal issues. And I feel quite crippled because I just know that a lot of things I want to talk about or write about aren't things that the mainstream media wants. And it's made my position as a writer very uncertain. I don't quite know what to do with it, to be honest. So I'm glad to be able to publish a book that, and I can say things like this, but at the same time, you've got, I also feel a bit suffocated in a sense too. Like, I have anything that I want to say that's going to be purely authentic for the most part has to come from my own, from a Substack or a tweet, and
but isn't that
the occasional opinion piece.
I mean, isn't that the kind of plan B?
Yeah.
Create your own independent, network, which we all have the ability to do now.
It is, and it's a great opportunity, but it is also very, very difficult to succeed in. And in particular, a lot of the ones that succeed tend to be very ideological and more aggressive, and I don't want to do that, and that makes it a weaker position just from a purely financial, economical standpoint. People who, for example, if you do a Substack, that's very pro-Trump or something like that, there's going to be people supporting you or very anti-left or whatever the topic of the day might be, or very anti-Trump. It's going to do so much better than something that's trying to maintain somewhat of, I wouldn't say it's a neutral lens, because I do have opinions and perspectives on things. I'm not just like, in the middle on every topic. I really am not. I have views that, full spectrum, I would say, but it's, but that makes it difficult because I'm not like appealing to this one demographic that's really passionate about something, that's where it's more activism than it is looking at the world and exploring.
There's still, I think, hope. I mean, you look at like Barry Weiss, Free Press has exploded and is huge.
Yep.
And Glenn Greenwald has got a massive platform, and Matt Taibbi, and what's that guy on the left who's a comedian and he's really far left? Why am I just blanking on his name? He's huge. And
yeah, I mean, they do exist, but a lot of them have started out with a lot of traction already. And
right,
but
they come from like mainstream institutional journal. Yeah, they pivoted out of the mainstream massive institution, so they were already kind of known.
Exactly.
I think, if you're not like a known entity already, it is much harder.
It is. But I am a fan of, look, I'm not into let's abandon every institution. I still think that these institutions can be, some of them can be potentially changed from the inside if there's enough will and of the people who are on the inside and they take action. But that said, doesn't mean that we cannot form new institutions. I don't want these new institutions to be as bad as, because a lot of people are like, citizen journalism and alternative media, but those are just, if not more, ideologically captured often. I think things like Barry Weiss's project, I think, are a bit more, trying to find some balance in there. I do have an idea of a project that I would like to hopefully pursue that's a little bit more of that in that vein. And I hope more people do that. I think it can only be a benefit. But I'm hoping that it isn't just, a counter reaction to things they don't like. I think it has to be more substantiative than that. And I think it needs to be more committed to sort of principles, old school principles of journalism. That's really what I want to see, but maybe with a new media lens.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for you. I'm excited to see how it all goes, and good job on writing a book. That in and of itself should make you feel very proud. And
it does, because I'm very, very inherently lazy. So
that leads me to my last two questions. What's your biggest defect of character?
That is certainly one of them. I think I also have one of the worst memories on earth. It's not really a character defect. It's just, I guess, how I am. But I feel like I'd be so powerful if I had a great memory. So maybe I'll get that implant. I think sometimes it's both a defect and maybe there's a positive element to it too. But I'm often undecided about things. So it's hard for me to sometimes take like a very strong position on something unless I'm very, very certain. And that certainty it's just very difficult. And
I understand that.
Yeah. And so that makes it, I think, difficult to be effective sometimes.
Very. People want certainty. I mean, we live in a time where people are looking to everyone for authority, whether it's whatever leader or pundit or whoever they're looking to. They want some kind of certainty. And the people who seem to be the most self-assured in their opinions and their righteousness seem to be the ones who really flourish. And exactly. I definitely don't have that level of certainty or confidence.
No, so that's me. And then the other aspect of it, I would say, is like I am too much of a people pleaser at times as well, and that's something I'm working on.
Yeah,
Dr. Bridget.
Well, where can we find you and your book?
So my book is available on Amazon.com, Barnes and Noble. I'm told it's even going to be in the physical stores of Barnes and Noble. So that's pretty cool. I hope somebody sees it and takes a picture for me. Those are the main platforms. If you're in Canada, it's also at Indigo chapters. And in terms of finding me, I am on Substack. The easiest way to access that is Katherine Writes, WRITES.com. And I am on the platform formerly known as Twitter, but is now X. I feel like everyone has to include this part.
It's like what happened to Prince.
Yeah.
When he became a symbol.
I'm Mysterious Cat, Kat. And despite my name, I don't go by cat. And also I like dogs. So I want people to be very clear on that particular point. And I think those are the main ones. And I have a YouTube channel where if you search my name or Forbidden Conversations, I have a podcast where I talk to interesting people about maybe slightly controversial things. I've talked to Bridget about some of those things in the past. So you can find me there as well. Those are sort of the main avenues.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really excited to have you on. You're always welcome back, and keep fighting the good fight in the politically homeless space that we occupy. Although I think you'll probably go down with the ship. I don't know if I'm going to abandon it. Like, I'm out.
Well, I don't know to end it. I'm going to go down with the ship.
I'm pivoting.
No, I am definitely politically homeless. I'm
pivoting to mommy blogging.
Oh, are you? I'm just going to open I think this was my plan B, by the way. I did.
What is your plan B?
Well, at the time, because when I thought my whole career would be 100% over, I was like, okay, I'm going to take all the savings that I have and open a coffee shop. It's always been my plan B somehow. I'm like, I'm going to open like a nice little cafe. And
you might want to talk to Nancy Rommelman about that before you do it.
Oh, no. Really? Oh, no. Well,
should have interviewed her
so much for plan B. Yeah. Okay. I need to talk to her.
When I lived in LA, there was a strip club right by where I used to live in my neighborhood called Plan B. And I'm like, what a brilliant name for a strip club.
It is. Maybe, I mean, I would take that on, but I don't have the body for it or the temperament. But other than that, it's an excellent plan B. But maybe I open my own. Yeah, now. So I'm going to try Media Empire next.
Okay.
If Media Empire doesn't work out, then, well, interestingly enough, even though I felt too lazy to write this book and almost didn't finish it, I'm hoping to write another one. So I already have sort of a book proposal out there. And then I have a third idea for a book as well. So maybe I'll just end up writing books. But if I don't, I'll launch my own media empire, or maybe concurrently. And then if none of this works, then I'll launch a potentially failed coffee shop. And then I'll go down with the ship, and I'll just see none of the stores will even hire me for customer service, because I can't fold clothes very well. I remember as a teenager I tried to get one of those jobs. That's how I became a writer, by the way. I couldn't get a job folding clothes because I couldn't do that properly. And then so I started writing, and that paid more at the time, because $50 to a teenager is like, whoa, I made it. When your minimum wage is like $8 an hour. So, and that's how I became a writer.
I love it. It's a great story. Well, I adore you, and I hope your book does extremely well in these uncertain times, and everybody should go check it out and check you out if they haven't already. I think my audience, a lot of them are familiar with you, but not everyone. So I look forward to seeing you around on the circuit talking about your book. Hopefully you'll make it on some left-wing organizations. Can go. I
hope so too. I just want to talk to everyone, but I particularly always enjoyed talking to you. You were, I definitely adore you as well. I'm not just saying that because the podcast is already over, so I don't really need you on my side. I just so it's genuine. But I appreciate it. well wishes, and I hope so too. Of course, it's my first book. I'm nervous. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I really do hope. I wrote it for people to read, so I hope they read it.
Yeah, I think they will. You talk to a lot of interesting people.
Yeah, they are very interesting people, and I've learned a lot in doing this book myself, and I've had a lot of, you go through a process of figuring out what you think about things yourself, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, I constantly change my mind about things.
Yeah.
I have
This is why I've been so held up writing my book, and I think that it's necessary for me to like process. So I take a lot of inspiration from you finishing yours. I will use it as motivation.
That would make me so enormously happy if I find out that you write a book and that I've somehow even in small part, have inspired the fact that you have finished it. And I am very happy to hear that you're back on the comedy circuit as well, because I remember our last conversation, you said you were thinking you were going to do it and you did it. So I'm very, very happy about that. And I'll have to come see you someday.
Definitely. Once I get myself warmed up a little bit. But yeah, it's fun. It's good to be back. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pluto TV is TV the way it should be, free. With over 300 channels, thousands of movies and TV shows costing zeros of dollars. So if you want to watch shows like Ghost, The Walking Dead, CSI, Star Trek, or The Price is Right, well, The Price is Right. It's free. Hit movies like Braveheart, Sonic the Hedgehog, Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, or Mean Girls won't cost you a thing, because everything is free. All you have to do is download the app, which, by the way, is also free. Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.
There's no check-in this week because my host monkey daughter got everybody the plague. In case you can't tell by my voice. Tune in next week for another riveting episode that will change your life, help you get out of your own way, and solve all the world's problems. I want to thank our composer, Jared Elias, my co-producer and cousin, Maggie, and all of you out there listening. This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.